I'm the Borscht Bandit, and this is my journey across the former Soviet Union. Join me as we uncover stories and legacies, the Soviet sagas. Today's former Soviet republic is Estonia. We are headed to the eastern borderlands of the Russian-speaking Ida-Virumaa region to discover the legacy of a secret Soviet nuclear materials processing industry. Then we'll cross the notoriously tense Russian border on our way to a Russian border town named after an Estonian communist. We are headed east towards Narva from Tallinn train station to explore the mostly Russian-speaking regions.
What's your first impressions of the train?
Nice modern European train.
Welcome to our first stop in the Estonian East, Jõhvi. During the Second World War, the retreating German army destroyed the original train station here in 1944. This iconic building, unfortunately, left here to rot as your first welcome to Jõhvi, was built in 1951 by the new Soviet administration in what we call in Soviet architecture is a Stalin-era classical design. Soviet architecture during the post-war Stalin era prioritized style and ornateness. This building is an example, featuring pseudo-classical elements like a triangular pediment, pilasters, and a symmetrical form. After taking in more bilingual signs and boarded up Soviet buildings, it's time to head to our next destination. Спасибо большое. Marshrutka just left us off. How was your first marshrutka ride? Your first ever marshrutka ride?
I pissed them off because I didn't close the door on the way in. Or when I came in, I was the last one. I didn't close the door.
Yeah, you didn't close the door.
I didn't close the door.
Welcome to Kohtla-Järve, where an old Soviet water tower welcomes you to town.
У меня есть вопрос. Вы знаете, как называется это здание?
Вы поймете, это водонапорная башня.
Окей.
Там туда закачивалась вода раньше, и оттуда поступала в квартиру.
Вода.
Вода.
Понимаю. Интереснее.
Сейчас это она не работает.
Окей, не работает. Очень советский.
Точно.
Советское время. Понимаю.
Now this is the kind of place you come to get great deals on old Soviet records. Like this record from Dean Reed, who was actually an American communist activist turned musician who became incredibly popular in the Soviet Union and moved from Colorado to communist East Germany, often nicknamed the Red Elvis. But let's take a look at this, the logo of the 1980 Moscow Summer Olympics. But did you know that the Moscow Olympics weren't just in Moscow? All of the sailing events were actually held in Tallinn in Soviet Estonia. So yeah, we're definitely going to get this record here. But shops like this also have all sorts of old Soviet books for pennies, which I think is really cool for anyone interested in historical preservation.
Музыка? Сколько стоит?
2 евро.
Два?
Да.
Хорошо.
Yes, we got The Flowers Are Born of Friendship from this 1979 song competition, and as we talked about, is Olympic. So flip it over.
Nice artwork.
Really beautiful artwork. And then, of course, we have Russian and English. So my thoughts are, was this made for people who are coming to visit for the Olympics, maybe foreigners, people who are just speaking English? But on the back, it says, in the Lithuanian, Russian, and Estonian languages. When maybe received or purchased or acquired by someone here who was living in the Estonian SSR at the time of the Olympics. So I'll be honest. One of the first things that struck me in Kohtle-Järve is the poor condition of so many of the old Soviet residential buildings, many of which people are still living in. Estonia gets a lot of credit internationally as a success story of post-Soviet reforms, a tech-focused, rapidly developing country under neoliberal European capitalism and social democracy. But this is where the economic inequality between the eastern side of the country really contrasts with the futuristic high-rises often shown in Tallinn. That's not to say there aren't things to celebrate about Estonian innovations, but I do think a lot of the economic deprivation of this region is an untold story. But I must genuinely say, where the region lacks in building maintenance, they more than make up for it in friendliness and hospitality. So you were just saying that one of the things that you're noticing about Kohtla-Yarvе is what?
Well, it's very clean compared to Ireland, or at least Belfast. Like the buildings, for instance, like obviously are in decay. Like they should be replastered, repainted, but I don't see any like rubbish or trash. Like in Belfast, especially near decayed buildings or like abandoned buildings, that would be just like a literal landmine of trash. And there's not even like dog poop or anything.
Yeah.
There's like hardly even cigarettes.
And we're in a residential area. There's no dog poop. Everything's really well kept up with and kept clean. And I would say that's probably one of the similarities that I am seeing here compared with Moldova or Pridnestrovia, which is where I've also been. Everything there was also very, very, very clean. And I don't know if we just live in a very dirty place or if this is also maybe some sort of shared Soviet heritage in a sense of
I think it has to do with like the community culture.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, if you're going to trash the community you live in, you're just going to be seeing that every day.
Yeah.
And there's sort of like a mutual respect here to keep the community, the environment where you live clean.
Yeah.
This is the famous Kohtla-Järve Palace of Culture, built in 1952 in the Soviet period here in Estonia, during a time when the town played a key role in the Soviet Union's oil shale energy production. Designed in the Stalin-era neoclassical style I was talking about earlier, it was one of the many palaces of culture created across the Soviet Union, which were monumental spaces dedicated to public education, the arts, and community life. These sorts of cultural centers offered libraries, theaters, music halls, and hobby groups, bringing artistic expression to everyday people across the Soviet Union, especially in industrial towns like this one. Today, the Kohtla-Järve Palace of Culture continues its mission, hosting events, performances, and exhibitions for the local community. Between 2013 and 2015, the Kohtla-Järve Cultural Center underwent extensive renovations to modernize the facilities here while preserving its historical Stalin-era architecture. And these renovations were part of the broader efforts to enhance the city's cultural infrastructure. Today, it stands as one of the best preserved examples of Stalin-era architecture in Estonia and possibly the entire former Soviet Union.
Спасибо, спасибо. How you feel?
Not bad.
Welcome to Sillamäe, a town along the Baltic Sea that was once a secret Soviet nuclear town, where even still today, a strange, dreamlike ambience still lingers. With wide Stalin-era neoclassical avenues leading down to the Baltic coastline, the town feels like an off-season holiday resort. Its tranquil parks and empty plazas give off the impression of a model town or film set, a place frozen in time. Originally a popular resort in the 19th century, the town shifted dramatically after World War II when the Soviet Union discovered uranium in the nearby shale. The original inhabitants were mostly sent to other parts of Estonia or the Soviet Union, and Sillamäe was quickly constructed by German POWs into a secret industrial hub for uranium production, a key part of the Soviet nuclear program. It's important to note that the town was a closed city with strict security and secrecy surrounding its operation. You weren't even able to photograph the sea. Only workers vetted by state security were allowed to live here. The stores here were well stocked beyond the norms of the time, perhaps to help maintain a loyal workforce. The uranium enrichment plant here produced uranium for the Soviet nuclear arsenal. Due to lack of safety procedures at the time, these jobs proved very harmful to long-term health over time. The architecture was certainly designed with ambition. The ornate buildings with their faux Greekan pillars are unforgettable, yet nestled among them is a touch of Estonian influence, a reminder of the town's deeper cultural roots. Look closely at the town hall. Its design was inspired by the Lutheran churches of Estonia, perhaps to add a bit of regional flair to spice up the environment for the workers here, many of whom came from all across the vast Soviet Union. The uranium operation ran until 1990, And today, the legacy of Sillamäe's nuclear past is still felt. Monuments to the Soviet heroes remain, but somewhat discarded, while signs of change are slow to come by in this town of 14,000, where Russian remains the dominant language.
Я вижу это здание, это кино, кинотеатр, да?
Был.
Был.
Да.
Вы помните это
Да,
здание?
мы ходили сюда.
Да, окей.
Каждый день были фильмы.
Да.
Да.
Как?
Здесь два зала.
Два.
Вот один зал, вот это длинный,
Один зал, да.
и туда зал.
Два.
Да.
Интереснее. И как вы смотрели там? Фильмы?
Там кресла, да, там вечером всегда и утром были сеансы.
Да.
Да, и мы смотрели. Каждый день были новые фильмы.
Новые фильмы, да.
Да.
Мы любим это город, это Sillamäe. Это здание. Очень красивое.
Сталинская архитектура, да.
Да, я люблю сталинскую
Внизу
архитектуру.
там были вы?
Да, море.
Да, вот там бульвар.
Да.
От Дома культуры и вниз.
Окей.
Да, это старый вот город. Ну, это уже 78-й год, эти вот большие. А так это все сталинские постройки.
Очень красивый. Спасибо большое.
Будьте здоровы.
До свидания. Очень приятно.
Similar to Kohtla-Yarvе, since the collapse of the USSR, this region has undergone significant economic decline, and that has left significant segments of the town in the need of a bit of care. Though there have been efforts to preserve the town's unique architectural history, the lingering toxic waste from the uranium production continues to be a concern for future generations.
Вы играете баскетбол? Что ты делаешь?
Not much of a court though.
Thankfully, some buildings have been kept in great condition, like the Sillamäe Palace of Culture. Similar to the Kohtla-Järve Palace of Culture, this building was constructed in 1949 and stands as yet another prime example of the Stalin-era neoclassical architecture. Its grand entryway features painted portraits of famous Russian composers and authors, and of course, the Soviet sickle and hammer to root this grand design back to the industrial proletariat that this building was meant to serve. You see, during the Soviet period, this center served as a hub for cultural activities within the closed city, catering to the workers of the nearby uranium enrichment plant. Imagine coming here after your hard work at the uranium plant and enjoying a classical music concert. Today, the basement, once a nuclear bomb shelter, houses a permanent exhibition dedicated to the city's Soviet history. The first Soviet house of culture I ever visited was actually in Grigoriopol, Pridnestrovia. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I want you to see how similar Soviet design could be in Soviet towns that were over 1,000 kilometers apart from one another in completely different republics. Both houses of cultures feature Karl Marx on the left side of the stage and, of course, Vladimir Lenin on the right side of the stage.
This Soviet monument here is known as the Peaceful Atom, a town, as I've already discussed, known for its nuclear contributions. This actually depicts Prometheus, the Greek titan. There's actually a number of Prometheus statues that were built in various sites across the vast Soviet Union in various different Soviet republics, usually tied in with the power stations and with the metallurgy industry. Now, this statue was built in 1987. Maybe a bit of a somber coincidence, just 1 year after the tragic humanitarian disaster at the Chernobyl power plant disaster in Ukraine. The official reason why this was built was the 70th anniversary of the October Revolution. Even in the Soviet times, bilingual, Russian language and Estonian language. Kind of a common misconception that a lot of people present is that in the Soviet times, it was just Russian. But no. Various Soviet republics, you'll see the bilingual nature. Russian was the lingua franca, and every individual republic had their own national language for the most part, and you would see this bilingual character on monuments. A lot of people say that it wasn't really a coincidence that this might have been built 1 year after the tragic Chernobyl disaster. maybe one final push at the propaganda. This came just a few years before the Soviet Union ended. This is a testament to all of the workers and the miners that kept the nuclear industry running here in the secret Soviet town. And today it remains. We are here at the monument to the Great Patriotic War, otherwise known as the Second World War. Flowers left out to remember the loved ones, the fallen loved ones of family members that gave their lives in liberating the world from fascism. And we can see here at the top, written in Estonian language, and below in the Russian language. This can be a controversial topic for Estonians. Many Estonians will see the Red Army not as liberators, but as just the second occupiers. This is the complicated story here. But here we are at the memorial, and this is a Soviet pilot, a relief of a Soviet pilot. On the other side, we have a Soviet soldier with the classic Soviet helmet, looking onward, facing his enemy with bravery. We also have a Soviet sailor. Do your own research and make up your own mind. But if it's up to me, I think Ernest Hemingway said it best when said the whole world owes a debt of gratitude to the Red Army for saving it from the perils of white supremacy and fascism. Regardless of what your thoughts are, the Soviet people gave it an enormous sacrifice, millions and millions of people, and such a scale that is just not even understood to this day. And had they not done that, we would be living in a very different world today.
Welcome to Narva, a city with 4 separate battles and history named after it, spanning across centuries as the forces of Europe fought for control over this strategic location. A city on the front line of current tension between NATO and the Russian Federation, with this tense border running right along the Narva River. An old Swedish-built fortress on one side of the river, facing off against a Russian-built fortress on the other, symbolizing how the tensions of old blend into the tensions of new. It was over this river that the most recent bullets whizzed across as the soldiers of Nazi Germany and their Estonian collaborators held off against a Soviet advance for over 5 months, before finally being overtaken by a victorious Soviet Red Army, which included many brave Estonians in the 8th Estonian Rifle Corps. Many Estonians will tell you that Narva used to have a beautiful Baroque old town before the last war, left from the previous Swedish occupations. Many have not forgiven the Soviet Union for demolishing most of it, excluding the castle and town hall, and then repopulating the area with ethnic Russians. Today, Narva is a mostly Russian-speaking city and a modern Estonia. They have fully restored the old Baroque city hall. The people here are ripped between opposing cultural crossroads, complicated mindsets of varied opinions and beliefs that I will not even begin to attempt to describe. So you've already seen 2 well-restored Soviet House of Culture so far on this journey. But what happens when these buildings are left to dereliction? Unfortunately, Narva provides us with a solid example, with the derelict ruins of the Vasily Gerasimov Palace of Culture. It's actually depressing to look at beautiful buildings like this lost to neglect, especially when we consider the inspirational labor leader that this building was named after. Back when Narva was part of the Russian Empire, Vasily Gerasimov led the 1872 strike at the nearby Kreenholm textile factory, where a brutal regime of dangerous working conditions and rock-bottom wages terrorized the local factory workers throughout their long work days. For his role in the strike, Vasily Gerasimov would be arrested. You can still find the slightly decaying and somewhat forgotten and almost haunting Soviet-era monument to the strike from 1972 that celebrated the 100th anniversary. It was working-class heroes like Gerasimov that the Soviet authorities liked to memorialize, seeking to drive working-class centered political education in their society. Soviet people need to eat, and there's no better place than an old Soviet-style canteen known in Russian as a stolovaya, or known in Estonian as a söökla. These cafeterias go back to the Soviet times, designed to provide the working class with low-cost, subsidized, but healthy home-cooked meals for less than it cost to make at home. This design was intended to increase gender equality by freeing up domestic labor that before the revolution had traditionally been carried out by women. This allowed women to focus on working alongside men in a wide variety of industries and promoted the Marxist ideal of equality for both men and women.
A declassified CIA document from the Cold War even admitted that the Soviet people may have ate a better diet than their American counterparts, and Stolovayas were no doubt an integral reason for that. Пожалуйста, пожалуйста. So let's give this a shot. Oh man, that's really, really good. I like that gravy and sauce. I think she said this was chicken and cheese. Let's see what this tastes like. Oh, it smells good. Oh yeah. That is so good. Ooh, wow.
Like the meat is really good in this one.
Yeah, the meat's really, really good. That was really good solyanka. Yeah. Cheers to our first compote. Oh, that's really good. That's really good.
Well, now it's time to cross that notoriously tense Russian-Estonian border I was talking about earlier. Why, you ask? I thought this was a vlog on Eastern Estonia. Well, it is, and that's exactly why I'm crossing this border. Because not only is Eastern Estonia shaped by its Russian neighbor, but the town of Kingisepp on the edge of the Leningrad oblast of Russia, only a quick drive from the border with Narva, is shaped by Estonia. You see, not only is there a shared history between Kingisepp and nearby Narva in terms of the famous military campaigns throughout history that I've referenced previously, but Kingisepp is named after an Estonian. And not just any Estonian either. His name was Viktor Kingissepp. And to understand Viktor Kingissepp, you have to understand the Estonia he came from, a semi-feudal imperial borderland. Born in 1888 on Saaremaa Island, Kingisepp grew up in a society where most Estonians were poor peasants, working land owned by a Baltic German aristocracy, a tiny ethnic minority descended from German crusaders who had dominated Estonia for centuries and still controlled its land and wealth. Marxist class analysis gave Kingisepp a framework to understand these contradictions and set him on a revolutionary path. At the time, Estonia was part of the Russian Empire, divided between the governorates of Estonia and Livonia. But when World War I broke out, Estonia entered the war under the reign of Tsar Nicholas II. After a series of military disasters and an economic collapse, the Tsar abdicated in 1917. A Russian provisional government took over and granted Estonia limited autonomy. A new Estonian provincial assembly was elected with Estonian Bolsheviks led by Jan Anvelt on the left and nationalists like Konstantin Pets on the right. But later that year, as Lenin's Bolsheviks seized power in Petrograd, the Estonian Bolsheviks followed suit, declaring the assembly void and taking power. Among their leaders was Viktor Kingissepp, and for a brief period, Estonia experienced communist rule. The Baltic German nobility was arrested or dispossessed, but the Bolsheviks were soon pushed out by the German army, still fighting World War I, which invaded and occupied Estonia. Estonian nationalists declared independence in the power vacuum, but were soon overshadowed by the German military, which aimed to re-establish aristocratic rule under a German client state. That plan collapsed after Germany's defeat in late 1918, when German troops withdrew and handed power back to the Estonian nationalists. Seeing a new opening, the Estonian Bolsheviks, still led by Anvelt and Kingissepp, crossed back into Estonia from Soviet Russia in 1918, founding the Estonian Workers' Commune as Red Army forces pushed into Eastern Estonia. However, they were eventually pushed back by a nationalist counteroffensive led by Colonel Johann Laidoner. The result? A Soviet defeat and the first official recognition of Estonia as an independent republic. Many Estonian Bolsheviks fled into exile in Soviet Russia. But not Kingissepp. His next mission had him leading the underground communist activities in the newly independent Tallinn. Despite being outlawed, the Estonian Communist Party continued to organize in the working class districts, where heavy industry had collapsed and unemployment was widespread. With underground revolutionaries living in hiding among the poor, Kingissepp built a clandestine network. But the constant threat of capture took its toll, and on May 3rd, 1922, just after a large May Day demonstration, he was arrested by the Estonian Internal Security Service, an operation they are still proud of, as can be seen in their marking of the 100th anniversary of his arrest in their annual review from 2022. Kingissepp was charged with espionage, inciting rebellion, and retaliation against a defense agent. A field court sentenced him to death, and he was executed that same night. News of his death spread quickly, and Kingissepp became a martyr for international communism. Just weeks later, the Russian city of Yamburg, near the Estonian border, was renamed in his honor. And that's where I am today, Kingissepp, Russia. It's not the only town that was named after him, because after World War II, Estonia became part of the USSR again, and Kingisepp's hometown of Kohtla-Järve was renamed Kingissepp. Monuments to the Estonian communist martyr were erected across Soviet Estonia. But after the USSR collapsed and Estonia regained independence, his image shifted back from communist hero to traitor and Soviet collaborator. Kohtla-Järve got its name back, and Kingisepp's statues were removed and moved to the Socialist Monument Graveyard in Tallinn, alongside his old comrades like Jan Anvelt and Hans Pugelman. Ironically, these same comrades who had fled to the USSR were later purged and executed by Stalin in the 1930s. Jan Anvelt, Hans Pugelman, Artur Wallner, Jakob Pavadre, and Ivan Raudmets had all fought for communism in Estonia, but none survived Stalin's suspicions. It would not be until several decades later, after de-Stalinization, under future Soviet administrations, that their Soviet legacies would be rehabilitated. So it raises the question, if Viktor Kingisepp hadn't been executed by the Estonian Republic, would he have lived long enough to be executed by Stalin? His legacy no longer lives on in Estonia, but here in Kingisepp, Russia, it remains. Where we find here, the last Viktor Kingisepp monument to stand in its original location. In 2018, this town held a vote on whether to revert to its original name, Jamburg. A strong majority chose to keep the name Kingisepp.
I've never lived anywhere that was cold enough to freeze a pond. Well, you may be wondering why I'm laying here right now, and I didn't get it on film because I'm glad my camera would have probably been damaged. But I went for a slippy slide right here, a very unplanned slippy slide, and those kids over there are f***ing laughing at me. But they're not helping me. I have Russian travel insurance. So thankfully I'm okay. But if I wasn't, jeez. What the? I'm trying to explore a fort right now. There's the remnants, I believe, of an old fort, I think from Peter the Great days, but I can't tell because I'm trying to read the sign over here. But I don't feel confident in walking in my 3-pound TikTok shoes. You may have seen these in the TikTok shop. They're not as good as they should be. I don't know what you can see back there, but I'm really, really cold. I'm really, really cold right now. My cheeks are freezing. The Luga River. And the Luga River would go on to become an important strategic position during the Great Patriotic War as well. That's not the original bridge. The original bridge was blown up and destroyed. No doubt to stop the advancing Red Army from moving on and continuing their liberation onward towards Estonia. This is the building of the museum, but it was actually originally a school. This school predates the October Revolution, back into the times of the Tsar, and this is the original building. But what's the sad story is that during the Great Patriotic War, Kingisepp was devastated by destruction from the fascist invasion. And across the road here is the cathedral. And this cathedral was also damaged during the war. So of course that bridge had to be rebuilt. But this is Karl Marx Street in Kingisepp. I think in the picture I saw there was maybe 1 or 2 buildings left standing. After the fierce fighting, the Soviet heroes stood fast and led an assault against the fascists and drove them back to the Estonian city of Narva, where they would have a World War II battle.
Да, и вот так вот его включали.